Good afternoon. It's Friday the 26th of July 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link today, we have Mark Anderson, Debi Evans and Cheryl Grainger. So welcome to the programme, everyone. We're going to get started off with warfare and preparation for warfare. And last week, as we may have mentioned, the RUSI Land Warfare Conference was taking place. They, of course, the overview, they say the difficult security situation in Europe after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has made restoring military readiness and capacity an imperative for the UK. So they had a number of keynote speakers. We'll bring Sir Admiral Sir Tony Radakin on screen, the Chief of the Defence Staff. He said in his presentation, our role as military leaders is to reassure the nation and stiffen its resolve, and our advice to ministers needs to be grounded in a thorough and honest assessment of the threats we face. So let's just look at one of the thorough and honest assessments of the threats we face from earlier in the speech. He said that Russia has lost 550,000 men, and our assessments are that it would take Putin 5 years to reconstitute the Russian army to where it was in February 2022, and another 5 years beyond that to rectify the weaknesses which the war has revealed. Now, of course, Russia absolutely comprehensively winning the war in Ukraine at the moment, but clearly plenty of weaknesses revealed there. These people are delusional. The new chief of the General Staff, this is the head of the British Army, gave a presentation as well. Let's just look at one clip from that.
And to that end, I have a bold ambition to double the fighting power in 3 years and triple it by the end of the decade. And I'll unpack that in practical terms shortly, but the key point to make is that the need is urgent. We have got to pull the future of fighting power into the present faster than we thought we could. We probably do have just enough time, as Jack said yesterday, to prepare, act, and re-establish credible land forces to support that strategy of deterrence.
He's talking on one hand about a strategy of deterrence. On the other hand, he's talking about having to prepare within 3 years. And most of the mainstream media headlines in this over the last couple of days have been quite definitive that he was saying that we are preparing for war within the next 3 years. He went on to say this, however.
You don't need me, and I won't rehearse the urgency of geopolitical threats. We are not, as the CDS reassured you, on an inexorable path to war.
We're not on an inexorable path to war, but we are on a path to war. And the question is why? And the other question is he telling the truth if he says that we are not on an inexorable path to war? Well, let's have a look at the preparations for war here. First of all, we've got MBDA. They've just signed a new deal with the UK Ministry of Defence to renew their complex weapons partnership. And what they say is that MBDA and the UK Ministry of Defence have renewed their strategic partnership on complex weapons for a further decade with a renewed portfolio management agreement known as PMA2 and worth at least £6.5 billion. The agreement will deliver battle-winning complex weapons to the UK Armed Forces faster, at lower cost and with greater agility. PMA2 will also support British jobs, skills and industrial investment. The new agreement confirms MBDA as the MOD's preferred supplier of complex weapons. Its framework will drive a further £2 billion in benefits and efficiencies while enhancing current capabilities. So, the key point here is that MBDA is a European project. So British Aerospace is involved with it. Airbus is involved with it. Leonardo, which is Italian, is involved with it. So this is all being done at a European level. And if you were watching the UK Column News last week, you'll understand the significance of that. We'll come on to that in a little second. But let's look at other preparations for war, because John Healey, our new Defence Secretary, was a busy boy over the last few days running around Europe. Let's have a listen to what he said.
So we've just finished a 2-day defence diplomacy drive. Started in Paris, ended here in Tapa on the Russian border of Estonia. What have we achieved? Well, we've reset relations with key European allies. We've signed a deep declaration on defence cooperation with Germany. We've committed Royal Engineers to help recce the problems Poland is facing on their border. And we've started to deepen the cooperation between Estonia and the UK to reinforce what is not just Estonia's border, but NATO's eastern flank. It protects Estonia, it protects us all. And this is just a government getting on with the job, but much more to do.
So rousing music, preparation for dealing with NATO's eastern flank. And again, we're talking about NATO as if it was a nation or a multinational body similar to the European Union. So anyway, as I said, he went around Europe. Here he is meeting the French defence minister, then he met the Polish defence minister, then he met the British military that are based in Estonia, and met the Estonian defence minister. And then he, in amongst all this, he went to Germany. So let's have a listen to his comments about the German visit.
So I'm here in Germany, our third week in office as a new government. This is what we mean by resetting relations with Europe. So today I've signed a declaration on defence, a determination to deepen the relationship between the UK and Germany. Together we can reinforce the strength of NATO, we can widen the industrial collaboration, and we can make our militaries stronger together. By working the UK and Germany in close alliance, we'll make both our countries secure at home and strong abroad.
So more rousing music. I'm sure everybody's inspired by that. Here he is signing the agreement with Germany. And of course, we should remember that this is one of a whole patchwork of agreements between European nations, bilateral agreements between European nations. Now, this, of course, is part and parcel of the European Defence Union that we've been talking about for so long. And we'll just remind ourselves that, of course, key to this is the fact that France and the UK are nuclear powers. This is why it's so important for UK to be involved in this whole process, as Christian Lindner, the German finance minister, was saying some time ago. So this is a key part of this. We should also just bring Ursula von der Leyen on screen and remind ourselves that she is talking about a 100 billion euro a year defence industry. One of the most valuable and strategic assets. This is why one of the reasons why we're driving for war so strongly at the moment. And we need to remember how this all fits into the European vision of defence union. So the left-hand pillar there on screen, that you can see bilateral, multilateral cooperation amongst member states. This is what we've just done with Germany, one of these deals. We've done these deals with many other European countries. And as the graphic showed, many other countries doing similar deals with each other. And the right-hand pillar there, of course, is NATO, because that is part and parcel of this. And as we've said before, if you haven't seen this page on EU military unification on the UK Column website, do have a look at it, because it explains this very clearly. Now, the question then is, why? Well, before we get to why, we'll just mention the fact that if we look abroad, the United States has just published its 2024 Arctic strategy, because this is going to be one of the major battlefronts that they want to develop. The UK also has an Arctic strategy, as does the EU. So we've got a battlefront developing in the Arctic, which also involves space weaponry. And we've got the Eastern Front, which is NATO's eastern borders. We've also got Africa as well. Very interesting. But the question is, why is this drive for war? And we maybe get a clue from this website, USmart, talking about 2024 US Treasury bondholders and the way that this has changed over the last several months. So the last several years, rather. So if we look in the past year, from May 2023 to May 2024, China has reduced its holdings, according to this, of US Treasury debt from $846 billion to $768 billion. And in fact, if we look at over the last decade or so, China has reduced its holding in US Treasury securities from $1.3 trillion to $768 billion. This is all as China decides to get out of the dollars, to divest holding dollars completely. In the meantime, the UK has increased its holding of U.S. Treasury debt in the last 12 months from $606 billion to $723 billion. And in fact, if we look at Britain, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Ireland, Belgium, and the Cayman Islands, which of course is British, effectively City of London, that has increased its holdings from $725 billion about a decade ago to $2.4 trillion in 2024. So we're seeing China divest of dollars, and we're seeing at least dollar debt, and we're seeing the West, Europe, the UK buying more and more dollar debt as we attempt to bail out the dollar system, and the fact that we require the United States and its military infrastructure to prosecute this war that we are so determined to go to. And I'm going to suggest that, in fact, it is inevitable that unless people stand up and argue against this very hard and very soon, it is inevitable that we end up in war. That's the direction of travel. And we've got to start speaking out about it. Mark, let me welcome you to the programme. Welcome to the first Friday you've done in a very long time. And let's go to the United States. And of course, you've had a visitor there from the Middle East.
Indeed, for the fourth time of his career as PM, Benjamin Netanyahu, boy, it's early here. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, spoke July 24, the very day that Joe Biden announced he would not seek re-election, which some say overshadowed Bibi to a point. Anyway, he addressed Congress for the fourth time, as I noticed, July 24. And this slide that you're seeing here is not a composite that I made. This is how Fox News showed it through YouTube. So much of the speech, maybe half roughly, they were showing images of protesters and their signage, while Bibi, many would say proudly, others would say arrogantly, addressed Congress. And we have some clips here, I believe, too, that gives us a little flavor of what he had to say and how he said it.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for giving me the profound honor of addressing this great citadel of democracy for the fourth time. We meet today at a crossroads of history. Our world is in upheaval. In the Middle East, Iran's axis of terror confronts America, Israel, and our Arab friends. This is not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between barbarism and civilization. It's a clash between those who glorify death and those who sanctify life. For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together. Because when we stand together, something very simple happens. We win, they lose.
As you can see, Bibi decidedly has a rather simplistic view of the issues. The implication that Hamas and the Palestinians, Gazans, you might say, glorify death, and it's Israel, who knew, that sanctifies life. Of course, many on-the-ground observers, journalists who are independent of both Palestine and Israel would beg to differ in terms of what they've witnessed the IDF do, particularly its air forces, burying many Gazans under tons of rubble, children included, and oftentimes not even appearing to go after military targets. And the nature of Hamas, of course, is such where it's sort of a citizen group of fighters, you might say. It's not a uniformed army. They have no air force. They have no real ground army in the formal sense. There's no Navy, of course. So you have a highly mechanized IDF against really a ragtag, comparatively speaking, force such as it is called Hamas. And at any rate, I think we could move on from there in what I have presented for today. Has Netanyahu finally lost America? Vox put this out. And I don't know. This article takes a particular view of things that I don't necessarily agree with. It's something to consider. Bibi got, I'm told, at least I understand it, 58 standing ovations. And it's worth noting that E. Michael Jones, the noted Catholic author and critic of Israel, to say the least, he noted on his Twitter that the only congressman of the Republican Party that did not attend Bibi's speech was Thomas Massey of Kentucky, the noted backbencher that's becoming more prevalent these days and earning more notoriety. And apparently about half the Democrats, or a significant part of the Democratic constituency in Congress, did not attend either. Going back to that Vox article briefly, it says here, according to the writer there, today Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was back in a very familiar building. Not only was he making his fourth address to a joint session of Congress, breaking Winston Churchill's record for foreign leaders, who knew? He's also a presence in the building halls since he served as a diplomat in the early 80s. I didn't happen to know that. He used to be a diplomat. Since he made his first speech in Congress in 96, Netanyahu has been almost as much of a fixture in politics, has been almost as much a fixture in politics in America as in Israel. Things felt differently today. It's not just that Netanyahu is a controversial figure, one who drew thousands of protesters onto the streets of Washington. That most recent speech, July 24, that's not new. What is new is he's become an increasingly marginalized figure, this article is claiming. It goes on to say, and I won't read the whole thing, that even a few weeks ago, when his speech was announced, it had the makings of a marquee political event. Today, it was overshadowed by President Joe Biden's highly anticipated Wednesday night speech to address his decision to drop out of the presidential election. Dozens of lawmakers, around half of Congress's Democrats, skipped Netanyahu's speech altogether. And it's notable that among those skipping the speech, of all people, was Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who himself is Jewish, as is well known. Even he didn't attend. And I can only figure, even though Schumer himself is not seeking re-election, when I read that, I thought maybe he was. I can only figure that a lot of those Democrats on the House side are seeking re-election, and Netanyahu is becoming a little bit tougher to be in company with, to explain things to voters, because it's finally becoming more achingly and incredibly clear that Israel is no longer necessarily on the side of right anymore. So at least on the Democratic side, he's becoming a little too hot to handle for those seeking re-election. And also later on, Mike, in my report on the vice presidential pick by Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, I'll have some connections and some reflections on Israel when I report on him. So we can go back to you at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I just wonder how much of Chuck Schumer's position is because Dianne Sarah is running a pretty effective campaign in New York at the moment. But we can talk about that in extra, perhaps. Okay, thank you for that. Debi, let's come on to you and back to the UK and health issues and the MHRA.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. And you knew I couldn't stay away from the MHRA for very long, didn't you? So, yeah, let's look at the MHRA because Dame June Rain, where are you? She's left, has she? We're not quite sure because the board meeting, of course, didn't take place. And we weren't allowed, well, it did take place, but we weren't allowed to be there for the live stream. And since looking on YouTube, as of today, it would appear that the May board meeting that Cheryl, I, and many others have attended, that one still isn't up on YouTube. So I want to thank you, wonderful UK column audience, because you've all been doing such a fantastic job. This is from Roger, but I'd like to thank Wynne and all the others also who wrote to the MHRA to say, why are we not allowed to see this live stream, and why are you using the election as an excuse? And this was the reply they got. Basically, they did schedule the MHRA board meeting for after the election. So that was the question. Well, why is there a problem? But they said that they couldn't assume that any incoming government would take the same approach as the previous, and that there would be the next board meeting that would be live streamed on Tuesday, the 17th of September. I think it's a whole load of nonsense, to be honest. But I want to introduce you to Liz Booth. Liz Booth is the People's Officer, so you'd expect her to know about the people. And when she was asked a question at that May board meeting that still isn't up on YouTube, I've got a little bit of a sneaky exclusive on how much does the People's Officer know about the people that she's meant to be looking after, specifically pharmaceutical assessors. She was only asked a simple question, but her memory seems to have failed her. Have a look at this.
That means in proportion to what you have already, what sort of change are we looking at in terms of assessor numbers for this area?
Oh gosh, you're challenging my memory for the numbers of pharmaceutical assessors. I think it's late 40s, early 50s in total.
So 10-15%.
So Mick, does that sound about right to you? Sorry,
yeah, I think that's in the right ballpark.
Okay, so yeah,
for pharmaceuticals.
I'll check the exact number and
then it sounds like I'm just trying to sort of understand where we are with this. There's sort of a slightly different emphasis from workforce planning within terms of the workforce allocation and that piece of work, which I guess is relevant now regardless of what the workforce is. So at some point when you think about how to take that forward and whether that's going to be something to prioritise or not, was that something already in your thinking about how that's done?
It's in my thinking about our planning generally, but obviously always very keen to seek the views and advice of the board, and this is a specialist workforce, and we need to treat it as such. So very happy to discuss it further, or indeed to I'm always would like to seek wise counsel about how to do this as well as we can do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's certainly something that might be helpful to come back with at the right moment.
Well, that was articulate, wasn't it? And for those of you wondering, she said 16 times. But I want to highlight the situation room, which we've got on the column, which is, this is the risks. These are the risks of the injections, and these are updated regularly by Mike and Cheryl. So thank you so much for putting up the situation room. Please go to that for lots more. And we've done an awful lot of work on the MHRA, and I just want to show you a little bit of what we have done. So this is Cheryl's latest presentation. If you haven't seen it, please do go look. I've written some articles, and then the next slide will show you even more articles that you can find on the MHRA. We've been really consistent. But on Sunday evening, both Cheryl and I received some emails. Now, I'm just going to literally flash the emails up on the screen. The first one is regards to how safe is blood transfusions, given the infected hepatitis scandal recently. That was sent to me and to Cheryl. And the second one that I'm going to show you, and I'm just showing you for reference because Cheryl is now going to explain everything. But the second one was sent to Cheryl, and that was with regards to safety and efficacy on the AstraZeneca injection. So without further ado, to dissect it all, especially when that came from Alison Cave, Cheryl, it's over to you.
Thanks, Debbie. Hello, everybody. I need to just highlight a few points to you. Can we have the first slide? Basically, these were the two questions that Debbie and I asked about the blood. And they're basically talking about the MHRA are responsible for continually monitoring both medicines and quality blood products. And they basically tell us that there's a thorough review and evaluation of the data. Well, can I point out that by mid-February 21, they already knew through Yellow Card that 205 people were dead, and there was one severe adverse reaction in every 74 doses at that point. Why did the MHRA do nothing? At this point, we start getting Norway and Denmark and Iceland start to suspend AstraZeneca, for example. They also talk about the Pfizer and Moderna public assessment reports, refer us back to those. Well, they were certainly not as detailed as what the EU put out, the European Medicines Agency, who had 16 pages of references at the end of their report. There was no references in the public assessment report. And the other thing that they throw at us in their email is that 93% of the UK population had one or more doses of the vaccines. But if you look at the UK HSA in April 22, 19.8 million had actually had no jab. That's around 30% of people. So we keep getting the same old things told us. It's as if the MHRA have had no increase in their understanding of the vaccines in the last 3.5 years. So what points did they bring up? They talk about the delivery of genetic material into a muscle through the mRNA vaccinations. They actually say it's genetic material. They basically talk about the muscle still. So Dr. Byron Brindle in mid-21, he actually exposed a Japanese distribution study that all regulators would have seen that basically says that the injection actually leaves the site that it's put into in the muscle and penetrates all tissues. They also talk about the harmless spike protein. This obviously is not harmless. So this is the most toxic part of the virus that they've used. It's about 5 to 10% of the virus we're talking about here. They could have used the other 90%, but no, they used the most toxic part. And all vaccines were based on this same spike protein. And of course, the spike is wrapped in a toxic cationic lipid nanoparticle, which tends to be highly inflammatory in the body. The license is to protect the recipient from the COVID-19 infection. Basically, it has been shown that the vaccines don't stop transmission or infection, hospitalisation and death. They also talk about genetic material. Well, we know that there are DNA plasma contaminants in there. It's rapidly degraded, is what they talk about. But of course, we don't know how much spike is produced. We don't know how long it actually stays there. And this is all complicated by having multiple shots. And also, they talk about the mRNA not entering the nucleus. And Dr. Bhakdi has shown that cells interact with the vaccines and becoming incorporated into the DNA. And on it goes, talking about the blood. They're actually talking about evidence that it won't have any effect from being vaccinated blood. And I ask, have they learnt nothing from the contaminated blood scandal? And then just a quick look at the other question that I asked regarding the AstraZeneca withdrawal. And all I can point out here is that the study that had been done, the long-term study, was about to be published. This was supposed to be submitted in the November 23. And what they found out that all the factors more than doubled in the vaccinated group compared with placebo. And I suggest that this is the reason for the withdrawal of the vaccine. So that AstraZeneca withdrew it before this long-term study could be published. And so next time somebody tells you that something is safe and effective, remind them that this study showed that there's no long-term safety data. And what is the EMA's position on the safety of AstraZeneca? They don't need to tell us now because the study has been withdrawn.
Cheryl, thank you. And Dame June Rain, where are you? if you're listening, perhaps you might answer some of those questions.
This is the regularly asked question. We do want to know the answer, or who will be her successor. Okay, if you like what the UK Column does, you would like to support us, the place to go is support.ukcolumn.org. A membership is £5 a month. We do need your support, and we want to say thank you again to everybody that is giving us that. Please share material you find on the various platforms. Clearly now, as of I believe yesterday, although we haven't had access to Facebook for quite some time now. Now that Facebook is actively taking down any posts, any attempt to share UK Column material. So we do need you to be the algorithm and to try to overcome that limitation, which is developing on multiple platforms. But you get the information. The source is always ukcolumn.org or ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. Pick something up at the UK Column shop if you possibly can, especially if you haven't got it yet, a copy of Your Life in Their Hands, which is all about Agenda 21. Agenda 2030, of course, is a subset of that. So do have a look at that. It covers the history of how this has developed. Yesterday at 1 p.m, we put out an interview with Joy Warren, and that is up on the website now on Debbie, help me out.
It's up on the website, on the UK Column website, but it's also Joy Warren public consultation. It finishes on the 31st of July. So please watch it, because none of us know what's coming out of our taps.
Yeah, and the key word that wasn't used by either you nor I was fluoride. Of course, yes. Thank you. Okay, and Mark, very briefly, please, your article on the Bilderberg Group up on the website.
Yeah, this is my second installment since just shy of a year ago to get beyond the meetings, to look at the outreach and the consequences of the Bilderberg meetings and not just stand outside the hotel and wonder who's there. And this one talks about AI and the big media really getting into a marriage, hitching to one another for the long term, probably mainly for the raw survival of the mass media cartel. But I did a lot of digging. I invite everyone to read it. And it shows a lot of connections and gives a hint to many more.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And another reminder, date for your diary, which is Saturday, the 19th of October at a venue in Bristol, venue to be announced. We will be hosting an event there and hope to see everybody in person there. Now, let's move on to the issue of assisted dying. And here is Lord Falconer. And of course, he's been campaigning on this issue for a very long time. He's a former Labour Party Justice Secretary, Lord Falconer of Thoroton. And of course, he wants to see dignity in dying. Now, he's put a new bill into the House of Lords that's been laid today, another bill on assisted dying. But of course, the last time he did this was Friday, the 18th of July, 2024. This was the second reading of his previous effort. Now, these are private members' bills, and normally private members' bills don't particularly progress because they don't have the support of the government of the day. But in fact, in this case, the indications are that he will have the support of the government of the day, and there will be time made for this. Both West Streeting and others within the Labour regime have made comments on it. So, as I say, new assisted dying bill in the House of Lords. Humanist UK is supporting this, as we might expect. And here's a comment from their head. Allowing people to choose the manner and moment of their own death should be seen as the hallmark of a compassionate society and recognised as a basic human right. And my question is, will people be allowed to choose the manner and moment of their own death if this legislation goes through? Or in fact, are we going to be looking at something else? Now, I want to bring back the article that Matthew Paris wrote for The Times in March. We can't afford a taboo on assisted dying. This was an effort to push for this type of legislation. So we'll take a few quotes out of this to remind ourselves what he said. He said, "I can't dispute the objector's belief that once assisted dying becomes normalised, we'll become more apt to ask ourselves for how much longer we can justify the struggle. If life is giving us more pleasure than pain, how much is all this costing relatives and the health service? Because how much is costing the health service is the most important question. How much of a burden are we placing on those who love us? How much of a burden are we placing on ourselves? So when we're making these decisions about what's best for us, we've really got to consider the cost to the health service in all that. If assisted dying becomes common and widely accepted, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, will consider choosing this road when the time comes, and in some cases even asking themselves whether it would be selfish not to. And he went on to say, within a decade or more, assisted suicide will be seen as a normal road for many to take and be considered socially responsible and even finally urged upon people. So is it a free decision made, or is this something that society is going to urge on everybody? So let's bring him back. And he said at root, the reason for assisted dying is Darwinian. Tribes that handicap themselves will not prosper. As medical science advances, the cost of prolonging human life way past human usefulness will impose an ever heavier burden on the community for an ever longer proportion of its members' lives. And this question of being useful is maybe something that we saw in the 1930s or something. But he went on, we may not be aware that our moral attitudes are being driven by the Darwinian struggle for survival, but in part they will be. I don't need to shout from the rooftops that suicide can be a fine and noble thing, or rail against the ever-growing cost of medical care in the final prolonged phase of people's lives. My opinions and my voice are incidental. This is a growing impulse which will grow, nourished by forces larger than all of us. Well, indeed. So let's look at one of those forces from history, and that's H.G. Wells. We've shown this graphic before, where he was saying the method that must in some cases be called on is death, the merciful obliteration of weak and silly and pointless things. And if we were watching Monday's programme, the video clip that Ben showed of one of Wells's mates was absolutely clear, expressing the same point of view. Wells went on to say, future humans will naturally regard the modest suicide of the incurably melancholy or diseased or helpless persons as a high and courageous act of duty rather than a crime. So Matthew Paris, absolutely echoing the mindset of the likes of H.G. Wells and Bertrand Russell and others from that period of British history. And Debi, very quickly on this, I'd be interested in your view, because, you know, this is the start of a slippery slope. I understand if people are in pain, they want it to end. But once we put that into legislation, that's the beginning of something. And I keep talking about direction of travel, but this is important.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Mike. It is a slippery slope, and it's almost indicating that assisted dying will become virtue signalling. And we know what's been going on in Canada with the MAID system. And if we're to follow that, then yes, this is a very slippery slope.
Okay, well, let's come to you then and talk about an organisation I haven't heard of, HDR UK.
No, I hadn't heard of HDR UK either. So who are HDR UK? Well, they're the Health Data Research UK. So they're the UK's National Institute for Health Data Science. Who knew that they existed, eh? So when I went to look a little bit more, what do? Well, apparently what they do is they're uniting the UK's health and care data to enable discoveries that will improve your life. But when I went to look at them, I saw that they're an independent charity supported by 9 funders based at 31 locations. Now, I do apologise because I omitted to put a slide in of their funders. So I'm very quickly going to tell you who they are. The 9 funders are the Medical Research Council, the National Institute for Health Research, the British Heart Foundation, Cancer Research, the Economic and Social Research Council, the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, the Chief Scientist's Office, that's for Scotland, Public Health Agency, that's for Northern Ireland, and the Health and Care Research, and that's for Wales. So those are their funders. So is this a charity that is an arm of the state? Let's go and have a look at the board. And there are many people on the board, but I've just highlighted 3 in particular. So we've got Junaid Bajwa there and Mark Walport, and we've also got Lord Azradazi. Now, let's just start with Sir Mark Walport. We'll take one by one. So Sir Mark Walport used to be the CEO, well, he is now the CEO of the UKRI, the UK Research Institute. He was Chief Scientific Officer for the UK until 2017, and he was also in charge of the Wellcome Trust. Do I need to say any more? But he was also part of the expert panel for NHSX. That's before it all became NHS Digital. And I found this photograph just here, which is quite difficult to find online. But let's have a look at the photograph that will show you Mark Walport on the expert technology panel. And there you can see Matt Hancock at the front, Mark Walport to the right, and in the middle there is Nicole Junkerman. So we can see the kind of company that Sir Mark Walport is keeping. Because if we go and look at Nicole Junkerman, for example, let's just, I'll just focus on Sir Mark Walport, just to remind everyone, it's Imperial College, government scientific officer, all the things that I just said, just to highlight that. So he keeps company with Nicole Junkerman, and Nicole Junkerman has NJF Holdings, and she is a disruptor entrepreneur, and she's also a trustee of the Royal Academy of Arts, and in 2024 she was appointed a trustee of the Royal Marsden Cancer Charity. Yet again we see cancer. But our very good friend Johnny Vedmore from TNT Radio has done so much work on Nicole Junkerman. I just wanted to remind people, I mean, he's done a series, but basically he's saying that she has many connections with Mossad, Panama Papers, and also Jeffrey Epstein, and she's known as the IT Bond girl. So that's the company that Sir Mark Walport is keeping. And then let's look at Junaid Bajwa, because when his face turned up, I thought, I recognise him. He's a practicing physician. He's an NHS GP. He's also chief medical scientist for Microsoft. That says it all. He's worked for Merck, and he's got loads of global digital experience. But I'm not quite sure whether his memory is having a bit of a lapse as well, because he seems to have omitted declaring HDR UK on his MHRA board declarations of interest. Yes, he is on the MHRA board. Well, do they know this? Because this is the second time it's happened. Because if you might remember, Professor Graham Cook, he seemed to forget to declare his Fleming Institute Declaration of Interest. So I'm kind of thinking, MHRA, do you know that one of your declarations of interest is missing? So let's go to the third gentleman, and we've got Ara Darzi, Parliamentary Undersecretary for Health, Privy Council, Life Sciences Acceleration, doesn't the accelerator say it all, and Imperial. And he's a very, very busy man. He's worked previously for the Blair and Brown government. And you can see that he's been involved in the Tony Blair Future Britain conference. I think we've got a slide. That's it, the Future of Britain event with Tony Blair. And he also published Better Health and Care for All. And he made a lot of promises. This was back in 2018. So anybody that says that Labour doesn't know the agenda or didn't know the agenda, have a look at this, because there's a 10-point investment and reform plan. I'm not going to go through it all. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things, just so that you know that Labour have been on the same page as the Tories, the Uni Party, for a very long time. They've been looking at digital infrastructure, obesity, smoking, alcohol. He wants to transform the healthcare into an NHS for the 21st century. He wants to ring-fence national insurance and a new deal for GPs and mental health. And on top of that, on top of his 10-point investment, he's made a 10-point offer to citizens, would you believe? So you're all going to get a single named GP. And also he was highlighting personal budgets. And that gets very complicated because some people actually need to be an accountant to work those out. He also said there'd be no delay in beds, no waits on trolleys, no understaffing. There'd be an increase in earnings from exports. So he's using the NHS as business, obviously. So not many people have listened to that report, but I just wanted to highlight it. And to remind you that also Lord Darzi is chair of the Fleming Centre, which is antimicrobial resistance. And we all know that that's a big agenda moving forward. But just recently, in the last few days, despite Wes Streeting saying the NHS is broken, and ask me, I can tell you in 5 minutes, the NHS is broken. But despite that, Wes Streeting thinks it's a good idea to employ, because he'll get a lot of money, Lord Darzi, from this, to employ Lord Darzi to do a rapid assessment of the NHS. And this has got to be delivered by September. So, Lord Darzi, if you want to come and ask us and the UK column audience, you won't need to look far before you get a very true picture of how the NHS has already collapsed. So keep a lookout for HDR UK.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you very much for that. Now let's move on to online safety, because Ofcom has published some new information this morning. There's apparently nowhere to hide for tech firms on online safety. Ofcom has published draft industry guidance on transparency reporting and information gathering. So this is because they say that the user safety practices of tech firms would be put under the spotlight under draft transparency reporting plans announced by Ofcom today. Isn't that great? So they're saying that they're consulting on draft industry guidance. So they've got, first of all, first consultation going on here. This is all about transparency notices to applicable online services, and these notices will be issued by Ofcom, they say, starting in 2025, subject to a statutory instrument being laid in Parliament. They'll set out the detailed safety information that providers must reveal in their transparency reports, the format it should take, and the deadline by which they must make it public. So this is all about making sure that the MHRA has all the data it needs to be able to say that there have been, 10 million posts about Trump being shot or whatever it happens to be, so that they can then justify the censorship regime as this goes forward. Now, this is all going to begin in early 2025, and they are asking for this consultation to be responded to by the 4th of October 2024. But they have a second consultation going on. If we have a look at that one, this is all about online safety information guidance. So what they're saying here is that complementing our transparency reporting powers, the Online Safety Act also gives Ofcom wide-ranging powers to assess information held by regulated tech firms, as well as a wide range of third parties. This is fundamental to our role as a regulator. These powers will help us to understand the effectiveness of the safety measures tech firms have in place and to gather evidence if we have specific compliance concerns. So they've published this second consultation, which sets out draft guidance for industry on our general approach to online safety information gathering powers and their duties to comply. So basically what we're saying is that Ofcom is already becoming this massive data gathering organization as it hoovers up bulk data on how we're using tech platforms, the types of material that we're sharing, how tech platforms are dealing with that material, how they're labeling it as misinformation or disinformation, how they're censoring it, and so that they can provide a guidance on how better to censor the types of information that are really not suitable for you or I to see. Because there's plenty of that going about on social media, although, as we've been talking about for quite some time, less and less of it coming from the UK column at the moment. By the way, we should just mention, failure to comply with a transparency or information notice, so either one of these two things from Ofcom, could result in tech companies facing fines of up to £18 million or 10% of a company's worldwide revenue, whichever is higher. And of course, as we mentioned on Wednesday's program, they have already pushed out a fine to TikTok, which that fine, by the way, was on the basis of legislation which is pre-Online Safety Act. So they're going to be even more draconian following this. So we'll see how that goes, and we'll continue to report on that as it develops. Let's come back to you, Mark. And well, of course, we've talked about Trump. We've mentioned JD Vance as well, his pick for his deputy should he become the new president following the election. But you've got more insight into who JD Vance is.
Indeed, Mike. It is a bit ambiguous. On the one hand, he's just going to be turning 40. Trump probably would have, one good term left in him if he's presumably elected. And given the events that have happened, it's all but inevitable that Trump will be elected. Therefore, so will JD Vance. So let's look at who he is. If Trump couldn't serve, this guy would be president of the United States. Just yesteryear, he is said to have led a hard scrabble life growing up in Appalachia. But let's take a look at him. Who is JD Vance? Donald Trump's vice presidential pick. James David Vance, born James Donald Bowman, who turns 40 August 2nd, is a lawyer, author, and Marine veteran. He rose to the rank of a decorated colonel. Since 2023, he has served as Ohio's junior U.S. Senator, Republican Party. His BA is out of Ohio State, but his JD, his law degree, is out of Yale, one of the hardest law schools to get into. He served as a law clerk for very significant Supreme Court justices. And people can read the slides and freeze those to get some of those names. He wrote a best-selling memoir called Hillbilly Elegy about what he described as growing up poor in Appalachia with a single mother. It got national hype during the 2016 election, some 7 years before he became a U.S. Senator, and it was adapted into a feature film by Ron Howard in 2020. People might know Ron Howard played Opie in the Andy Griffith Show when he was a child. And the conservative Christian Mr. Vance at one time said he was inspired by Barack Obama's personal struggles, and that gave Mr. Vance a sense of hope. And we'll move on from there and kind of outline this. Now, here comes George F. Will, the noted columnist. Surging GOP isolationism is a dreadful development in a dangerous time, Mr. Will wrote back in 2023 November. It appeared in the New Hampshire Union Leader. And here we see a look at J.D. Vance as being kind of a paleocon, a more populist kind of Republican who is not going to be quick to go to war, who's going to be more of a non-interventionist. Of course, people kind of vilify that and call it isolationist, but there's no such thing as an absolutely isolationist nation. It doesn't exist. And yet they use that superlative. Anyway, what Mr. Will wrote about Mr. Vance here is explaining his support for U.S. aid to Israel, but not Ukraine. Now, that's notable. Senator J.D. Vance, the shape-shifting Ohio Republican, not altogether inaccurate, wrote, quote, Israel has an achievable objective, Ukraine does not. Many would argue, many would beg to differ. Actually, their objectives are identical, Mr. Will wrote. National survival while living in proximity to enemies whose objective is national annihilation. Vance's categorical conclusion that Ukraine's survivable is unachievable makes him a momentous symptom of Donald Trump's transformation of the Republican Party. If Trump becomes the party's presidential candidate, which he since did, one of our two major parties will be more isolationist than either party was during the 1930s high tide of America First isolationism. So Mr. Will is seeing J.D. Vance as a populist, non-interventionist, a different kind of Republican altogether, which many Americans would find refreshing because if a third party can't get in, why not have a transformed Republican Party that would behave something like a third party? Anyway, a little bit more that Mr. Will wrote about Mr. Vance. He reflects a long lingering American, but especially Republican tendency, particularly in the Midwest, where another Ohioan once exemplified it. Senator Robert Taft, who lived from 1889 to 1953, the son of a president, did not consider himself an isolationist, but early in 1940, shortly before Hitler's blitzkriegs and advances, Taft said, quote, it would be a great mistake for us to participate in the European war. I do not believe we could materially affect the outcome. He lost the 1940 Republican presidential nomination to Wendell Willkie. Willkie was pro Roosevelt and things like that. Anyway, Taft greatly, if inadvertently, contributed to the nation's security by voting against the NATO treaty. So this is this tradition out of Ohio that Mr. Will is citing. And it's also notable. I want to stay on that slide one more moment. It's very important. The part I underlined at the bottom, Senator Robert Taft's opposition to the NATO treaty, combined with his quest for the Republican 1952 presidential nomination, helped provoke Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of NATO, in 1951-52, that provoked Ike into entering the presidential race. This brought the Republican Party into the bipartisan internationalist foreign policy that won the Cold War. So that turn of events is what made the Republican Party formerly nationalist into a globalist party to a large extent. That's a very pivotal time in history. So Vance is implicated in sort of a philosophical, ideological sense in all of this. Now, there's another twist, of course. CBS News, of all things, sounding strangely conspiratorial, wrote that the billionaire who fueled J.D. Vance's rapid rise to the Trump VP spot, this analysis, that billionaire was none other than Peter Thiel of Bilderberg fame, or you might say infamy. What CBS News noted, among other things, former President Donald Trump's selection of Ohio GOP Senator J.D. Vance to be his running mate shows one thing remains constant, even in a presidential race upended by an attempt to assassinate one candidate and doubts about whether the other one is fit to run. Money, above all, is in presidential politics is still king. Vance, a relative newcomer to national politics, he is said to have grown up poor. His very first office was U.S. Senate, has assiduously courted billionaires and Silicon Valley titans to bankroll his unlikely rise from best-selling memoirist of despair, drugs, and generational poverty in Appalachia, all the way up to a ticket that not only gets him into the Senate, but a heartbeat away from the presidency. During his rapid rise, Vance has emerged as an ardent and effective defender of Trump. He used to be a critic of Trump. Who is the real J.D. Vance? Putting an intellectual gloss on the former president's raw MAGA populism. But Vance may never have been in serious consideration for the number 2 spot. He might not have ever gotten there had he not won elective office in a major Rust Belt state in the first place, that being U.S. Senate. Now we'll go on from there and summarize this a bit. And big donors, particularly from the tech sector, provided the rocket fuel that Vance needed to advance in electoral politics. Vance's most prominent benefactor over the years is Peter Thiel, the iconoclastic tech pioneer and investor, also a Bilderberg steering committee member for a long time. Thiel hired Vance at his global investment firm in 2017 and then nurtured Vance's political rise, donating $15 million to Vance's 2022 Ohio Senate campaign and helped him win a closely fought GOP primary before recapturing that seat, the Ohio Senate seat, in the general election. And we'll go from there, moving on. I won't read all of this. It does say at Yale Law School, Vance attended a talk by Peter Thiel about technological stagnation and the decline of American elites. Quote, CBS is saying this, Vance saw two trends. Vance is saying this about Peter Thiel. He saw two trends as connected. Vance later wrote about his first encounter with Mr. Thiel in a 2020 blog post in the Catholic journal, The Lamp magazine. And after Yale Law School and a short stint at a corporate law firm, Vance moved to San Francisco to work as a venture capitalist. Thiel then hired him to join a tech fund, Mithril, I think it's pronounced Mithril Capital, all while Vance continued to work on his memoir, The Hillbilly Elegy. So we'll go on from there just to kind of summarize and look at who J.D. Vance is. So it turns out that J.D. Vance is a Catholic. He converted from evangelical Protestant to Catholic in 2019. It talks about it in the National Catholic Register here. And it says that but the Ohio senator who's running alongside Donald Trump on the GOP ticket is not your typical Catholic conservative, at least not the kind that has been the norm in American politics. Instead, Vance is a self-described member of the post-liberal right, an upstart political movement that flips the conventional conservative script and emphasizes the good of the community over individual liberty. This controversial approach, which is inspired by and contested within the Catholic Church, includes harnessing state power to secure its aims, another break from the standard operating procedure of the American right. And these other slides, people can freeze to read more about it. But what this boils down to, Mike, is that many see Vance as a pro-union and pro-tariff and anti-war Republican, which many will consider important because that's how the Republican Party largely was before Eisenhower transformed it, as I outlined earlier. So that would be, many would think, a good view of Vance, bringing something, in a way, something old, something new to public office. But on the other hand, his connections with Peter Thiel, and who's a Bilderberg-connected billionaire, raises some questions. So it's a little bit nebulous as to where exactly J.D. Vance is coming from. This last couple slides, before it's news, one of the alternative websites out there speculated, well, he went to Yale Law School, he must be a Skull and Bonesman. Of course, that's the noted fraternity that has a very dark history to it, many would say, at Yale University. But I found no evidence so far yet that J.D. Vance actually was or is a Bonesman. And this is a picture of the meeting place at 64 High Street that we just showed there in Yale, Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, where Yale is located. And this last slide is just a little outline of the Skull and Bones, their emblem, number 322, many of their famous members, George Bush Sr., his son, George W., John Kerry, who ran against George W. in the 2004 election, two Bonesmen running against each other, and William Howard Taft, the father of the Senator Taft that I mentioned earlier. So a very interesting fraternity there, but so far no evidence that J.D. Vance belongs. But nevertheless, his history is interesting and yet contains a lot of things that raise a lot of questions. So there's something there to watch very closely in the months ahead.
Thanks, Mark. Right, Debbie, we've got something to end off with here.
Yeah, it's a happy birthday to my article, 2 years old today. NHS Long-Term Plan and Mental Health Implementation Plan, Phoenix or Dinosaur. Now, this is the article I made, 47 predictions from the long-term plan, and it seems that pretty much of them have all come to pass. So that's 2 years today. And finally, I've got a little bit of video, given Mark's last segment, given the race for the presidency. I'd like you to look at a short little piece of video of Gerald Ford back in 1989. What did he say? What did he predict?
Mr. Ford, what advice would you give a young lady wanting to become President of the United States?
Well, I hope we do have a young lady at some point become President of the United States. I can tell you how I think it will happen, because it won't happen in the normal course of events. Either the Republican or Democrat political party will nominate a man for president and a woman for vice president, and the woman and man will win. So you'll end up with a president, a male, and a vice president, a female. And in that term of office of the president will die, and the woman will become president under the law or Constitution. And once that barrier is broken, from then on, men better be careful, because they'll have a hard time ever even getting a nomination in the future. But that's the way it's going to happen, and I think it'll probably come sometime in the next 4 or 8 years.
Gerald Ford, 1989.
Well, he wasn't quite correct about the next 4 or 8 years, but maybe that is the way it'll happen. I mean, Biden hasn't seen out his presidential term yet, so let's see how it goes. Well, look, we got to leave it for there. No doubt we'll have more discussion on that and many of the other topics we've discussed today in Extra. If you're a UK Column member, stay on the UK Column member stream, and we will be back in a few minutes. Otherwise, have a great weekend, and we will see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. Bye-bye.